I'd like to talk about the three basic approaches of the core of yoga. And it's not exercise, per se. It is sound, the use of sound, the use of breath, and the use of concentration. These three yogas are called Dhyana, which is concentration, Prana, which is breath, and mantra, which is sound. And there's a lot of religion woven into these things, which I will discount and toss aside. These three approaches are basically non-verbal approaches and will tend to trigger those parts of your brain and your memory that it can be very impacting. The pluses are that you can get more in touch with what's going on in your body, kind of a communication of sorts with your body, a greater awareness of what's going on, and a way of working with your body and your perspectives that come from that level of pre-verbal awareness. That's positive. The negative is that if you have traumas that are pre-verbal, those can also be triggered. Meditation has been known to trigger reliving of things, perhaps before you're ready. Your greatest sense of safety in the present is the verbal. And I've spoken about that in my approach previously. But now I'm going to talk about the pre-verbal and its practices and how I use those practices. Mostly how I use those practices. So, what I'd like you to understand is that, like anything else, it has its negatives and its positives, and it's best approached as a part of something larger. It's like, bananas might be good for you, but an all banana diet could be a problem. So, there's a balance that needs to be had. And what determines that balance? It's, partly what you're comfortable with. If something is making you too uncomfortable, then it's a sign you might be pushing things a little to the extreme. So, if your goal is to comfort yourself, then these practices become a little safer. But they need to be blended in with the full diet, which would include the verbal approaches that I have spoken of. To make a full connection to what's going on in a good way, the verbal needs to be predominant. These other practices are great, but when you start to, have some negative reactions, pay attention. Back off. I would suggest that you've done it too much. So, the goal is actually to integrate all three, as it is with the dialogues, to integrate all three. But to begin with, you practice them in a sense that it's more separate. But after a while, then there's a greater and greater unity or interconnectivity of all the processes, and one shades into the other. So, with sound, I like to, each one of these core practices of yoga do relate to the three dialogues that I've mentioned. The creative and dramatic self dialogue, which I've called the kid and the artist. That's more what you contact with sound, because there you can be more imaginative and playful and in a variety of ways, and it's good to practice it that way. To make sound without it being a verbal thing, well, there are different approaches. You can repeat a phrase until the words are basically meaningless to you. Or you can make up sounds yourself and express them. Or you can sing sounds that you create. Some people are, the more hurt you are, then the more trouble you have integrating that kind of creativity into any practice. So if it seems silly to you, do it another way, but understand you have to challenge your barriers and your walls to some degree. When you're practicing that was mantra yoga. When you're practicing Dhyana, or the meditative approach, my way is to be in touch with your whole body. All that you're feeling and sensing, and whatever way. Paying, in a mindfulness kind of way, paying attention and concentrating on that, and then your mind naturally wants to move on, and so you do a kind of scanning of everything, and you might try to pay attention to more than one thing at a time. It's like a whole body awareness. Whatever feels comfortable to you. It puts you in touch with signals that your body is giving to you that you have previously perhaps ignored, and to which you can apply some intelligence. You notice that you're eating instead of drinking water. That means that signal has been confused. So being aware of that can help with awareness of what's going on in your body. So then you'll try drinking a little water before you eat that whole ham. I'm not into eating intelligent animals, by the way. I wouldn't touch ham. It's like, it's just my thing, if it were a survival issue, my regrets to the pig. But I'm not in that situation. So approaching it in that way, I feel is a good way to approach things. Now, you can blend this with the sounds you create, and that can be very revealing. That approach, Dhyana, is much more like the dialogue between the dramatic self and your objectivity. because you're just kind of objectively paying attention, not drawing immediate conclusions. You're watching. You're being aware, and that's kind of what's going on in the dramatic, objective dialogue. The communication between the kid and the director in you. That which is more emotional and that which is more mature and thoughtful. Your adult self. Okay. Now let's take a look at Prana Yoga. Prana is about the breath. You'll notice that your breath changes as your mood and your attitude and what you're doing change. This is natural. If you watch people's breathing, you can see if there's sudden changes, if someone is suddenly breathing very shallowly when they were otherwise breathing more fully, and it's like, what is that? You watch the face, and maybe it's because of fear. It might not be, but maybe it's because they're feeling afraid. So your breath and your emotions are connected. Prana is more like the more direct experiencing form of communication involved with emotion, which is a communication between empathy, that reflective ability, that ability to reflect, and that dramatic self, which I call a communication between the kid and the caregiver. Now the breath, you to play with the emotion in your breath. I mean, you can watch your breath. You're combining the Dhyana and the Prana. But if you want to go deeper into things that you might need to feel but haven't, and to experience those things, you can combine sound and concentration. And how you do this: breathe in with emotion and breathe out with some emotional connection. That's enough. As you do that, you will find yourself getting in touch, but you can enhance this by breathing in using sound, combining the mantra yoga a little bit, breathing in and out with ah and ooh and which is a major practice in yoga. And it can be mood changing and so on. So you can do this just to feel a little better, or you can do this to get deeper in touch. What I would say is, and many people can't do this, at least initially, but to breathe in with those, in trying to say Om, but with the in-breath. It's like, that can be a little more powerful added to the So that expresses a certain amount of emotion there. And I'm not in a high emotional state at the moment, so if you practice that, I can go deeper. Now, the negative things about all of these things is that if you have damage in your pre-verbal phase of your life, it can be bringing up things too fast for you to integrate and get rid of. And that helplessness, anxiety that I talk about, that kind of pain, bring up too much. So that's why I say, be careful in practicing this. If you're practicing it and you have disturbing dreams, quit. Okay, knock it off. Okay? You're bringing up too much. So that's what I would say would be an important flag to pay attention to in these practices. Religion often uses things that are pre-verbal and things that are more survivally oriented, which is where the pre-verbal resides. So they're going to talk about death, rebirth, all kinds of highly emotionally impacting things that seem to bypass everything and trigger the survival brain, the pre-verbal. Remember, trauma in the pre-verbal stages of life, that's wordless terror. So I would say, be careful. And don't let people manipulate you with those things. That's the major practice of some group that you're in. That could be because they want control over you. That could be people that are power mongers or something of the sort. So you don't really want to have that kind of situation, so move on out. And now, if you do the verbal practices, which I talk about, that's major, and definitely the first step. And I would advise learning those things before you do very much with these. That's some of the negative and the positive things about the 3 basic yogas or yogic approaches, which are sound, breath, and concentration. And I hope that's been clear enough for you. If not, then ask me questions. If you disagree, disagreements they are important things. That's how we learn more. So that's fine. Have a good day. Namaste.